Okay, today is February 25th, 2021. My name is Enshi. I'm interviewing Kevin Trinidad for the he's an Asian American Archive at Rice University. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And I guess how have you been since the last week was crazy with the winter storm and the freezing temperature without electricity for many Houstonians.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was prepared for it, but I wasn't prepared enough. And I did survive. It's just, and I didn't have that much of a bad condition. It's just mentally it affected me. So, because I haven't experienced anything like that before. We used to have like a snowstorm in Washington where I used to live, and we would have power the whole time. So it wasn't that bad. But this one was definitely a bit I needed some time to get over it in a bit. And now this week, our classes started back up, and our they pushed back our assignments, but it doesn't help because now if we just do it last minute, we're just going to be swamped with work. So it's like pretty much got to manage our time right now.
Okay, good to hear. At least you're all right.
Yeah.
So good to go back to our, I guess, life history. To start with your coming into existence. Where were you born?
I was born San Diego, California, 1990, October 1st. My dad was a sailor in the U.S. Navy, and my mom was an accountant. And well, they met in Hawaii because my dad was stationed there, and then somehow they ended up getting stationed in San Diego, and then me and my brother were born there.
And your brother is older or younger than you?
Yeah, my brother was 3 years. No, yeah, my brother's 3 years older than me. He was actually born during the Gulf War, and my dad wasn't or with him when he was born, but he was with her with me.
So your parents they were born back in the Philippines.
Yeah, my dad, I've been told that he's from Manila, and my mom is from a town called Olongapo. Well, no, it's called San Antonio in the Philippines. Yeah, so they're from different places in the Philippines.
What are some of the stories about the Philippines that they share with you during your upbringing?
Okay, during upbringing, the currency rate was different at times, so they would tell me that if you go there with $5, the currency rate, you're gonna get like 1,000,000 pesos. And they tell me a lot of stories about how like people and the culture there and how things are like and how our cars are different and grocery stores are different and markets are different, food is different. They just yeah, they said it's a really different world, and I always wanted to go there, and they were like, because they grew up there, they're like, oh, we don't want to go there because we grew up there, and you're not gonna like it. So yeah, they kind of they painted a good picture, and they also painted a bad picture. And then I finally went there when I was in the Navy, and it wasn't much of a culture shock, but I mean, it was everything they taught me it was gonna be.
What was your earliest childhood memories, if you could share with us?
Let's see, early childhood memories. So my dad, he's actually deceased right now, but my earliest memories with him was um, he would I think the movie Aladdin came out, and I really liked that movie. So my dad would put me on the carpet and drag the carpet around the house because I told him I wanted a magic carpet, and I guess he made that happen. Um, yeah, my dad and all his friends, they were all Filipino, and they had a camaraderie going. So we actually had an extended family in San Diego, and we would have potlucks once a month. So I just had a lot of interaction with people. And yeah, when he passed away, we had to move to Hawaii, where my mom lived with her sister, and we had to live with them for a bit until we could buy a house. And then I had memories over there because I have cousins there too. So yeah, a lot of my upbringings was just hanging out with family as kid, playing around as kids.
Yeah, that must be very difficult on the family. with that kind of traumatic experience. I'm wondering, how did your mom cope with it and the family?
Uh, I believe my mom would. I think me and my brother would take turns. So first, my mom would hug me and cry for like maybe 20 to 30 minutes. And then she would let me go and say, okay, go get your brother. And then she would hold my brother and she would cry and sob for like maybe 30 minutes. And let's see, there's that. I also had to, after we moved to Hawaii, I had to see a therapist because I wasn't concentrating in school. And they had to, and then I was a bit traumatized as a kid because, so my dad was murdered and they had to explain to me that, okay, so they're not gonna try and murder you because you live here in Hawaii now and they want to, how do I say this? Yeah, they said the sharks in the ocean and they can't swim because the sharks will eat them. That's what they explained to me.
Wow, I'm very sorry to hear that, but
No, it's okay.
glad your family have strived through the difficulties. Okay, and
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm wondering, what are some of the family values that your upbringing has been emphasized with?
Let's see, family values. I used to, every now and then I would fight my brother, so my mom would want me to not fight with him. At one point, I did hit him, and she just said, "Okay, if you spill blood, like it's over for you." So like she wanted me to do good at school, and she wanted me to not fight with people. So I guess that's a family value.
And what are some of the food that you had in your family? Can you share some recipes or your favorite dishes with us?
Yeah, definitely chicken adobo. My mom makes it a special way. I think she puts wine in there too while it's boiling, but you got to cook it slow so the meat's tender, and that's like that's the best. I could never recreate it. There's also it's called arroz caldo. It's also a Spanish dish that the Mexicans also have. It's the rice soup. That's actually my favorite that my grandma cooked for me before I left for the Navy. My mom also makes flan, which is also a Spanish influenced dish, and she has a secret recipe that only she knows how. Shrimp lumpia, which you just buy a whole bunch of shrimp, and each lumpia has a shrimp inside of it. And that was actually like a favorite that my mom made, and like every time we're invited to a party, she would make that.
That sounds delicious. Great. And I'm wondering, in Hawaii, how would you remind me, how old were you when you first moved to Hawaii, and what was the neighborhood like?
Let's see. I was 6 years old. The first neighborhood we lived at was called Makakilo on the west side of Oahu. So what it is Oahu has Honolulu, and on the east side where it's all developed and everything's like nice and beautiful there. And then on the west side was still developing. So where they built a neighborhood on the mountain. So you have to drive 2 miles up a mountain to get home. And when you drive down, it's just you're just on brakes the whole time. So the first neighborhood was a yeah, Makakilo. That was like it's just a big residential neighborhood and just old houses, new houses. And I lived in my auntie's house with my cousins. And I think for a couple months until my mom got a job and bought us a house.
And what was the demographics like? And were there a Filipino community?
It was very prominently Asians, so Japanese, Filipinos. And what's interesting there is that the locals there are mixed with either Chinese, Portuguese, Spanish, German. They're all mixed into one, and the people from Hawaii just say I'm this, this, and that. So it was very like very Asian diversity there, and actually whites and blacks are the minorities over there.
That's interesting. And do you remember any of like kind of events that stand out about like the distinguished racial identities?
Man, events that stood out, I do know it's like there really isn't much of a racial problem there. But I do notice in school, like we would have, Caucasian families and Caucasian students, and people tend to, they tend to say things about them like, "Hey, these guys are just howlies. They're just visiting," and I don't know. They call one person a polar bear one time, and at first, like growing up around that, I just didn't think of it as a big of a deal. But then moving here to the mainland, where I work with mostly Caucasian people, and I realized, a lot of that stuff isn't going to fly. You know, bringing that, to the mainland.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And also, I'm wondering, what was so you were studying in until high school in Hawaii. What were some of the experiences back in school? And for example, your favorite subject back then? Just some random school memories.
uh Man, random school memories. Let's see. I guess I was part of a dance team. It was like a hip hop thing. We did like choreographed dances, and we would perform. We started off performing at a banquet for the freshmen, and then we ended up performing at let's see, high school football games. I mean, this was the school's club, funded club, so it was we were always going to get booked for that. We performed for like a state fair, and I thought that was really cool. But that was actually my first time like getting on stage in front of like thousands of people, and it's just interesting because I was always like the kid with glasses that was quiet and everyone thought I was a dork. And then they see me on stage dancing and they just completely like, why? I just didn't expect you to be up there, you know? But yeah, it's like when you're on stage, you're like a completely different person. So that was a pretty fond memory of my.
That's super fun and interesting to hear that you have a kind of a dedicated stage persona. So is that like how you started inserting yourself with music and performance?
Um, well, man, it just felt like that was the first time I did it. And then every time after that, it just felt like just, when if you're going to give a speech, like a presentation for a project, you just don't feel like you're into it. But if it's something like a song you wrote and then you perform it on stage in front of millions of people, it's just completely different. Like you're not shy to perform it because you know what the song's about, and you're not as subjective to it because this is like something that you want to do. But yeah, so I think that the other high profile event I ever performed in was part of a flag detail in the Navy, and we were at the ball game, the Seattle Mariners. So that it's a let's see a weeknight. So I think they sold like maybe half the stadium. So I would say like maybe 10,000 people. Yeah, and then we had to go out on the baseball field, and I was holding a little rifle and did a little thing. Well, I didn't do any flips. I just did that. That's it. Yeah. Uh, but yeah, that was actually like one of the larger profile events I've done.
Super cool.
Yeah.
I'm actually also curious since you're one of the performing side, and also I know that as of recent, that you're composing as well. Did you started composing at that age?
I I actually started composing 3 years ago. I had a bit of a traumatic experience. Another one actually. Somebody was just lying to me about stuff, and I started playing guitar again. And my friend, who was really into music that I worked with, um, he was always inviting me, like, "Yeah, come jam with me, come jam with me." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know." And then I told him, I was like, "Hey, man, I started playing guitar again." He's like, "Okay, now you got to come jam with me." So then I did, and he played in bands before, and he taught me a lot of stuff, and yeah, it all went on from there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I was jumping ahead a little bit, but if we could go back to high school, after you graduated, you joined the Navy, right?
Yes.
What was the decision to do that?
Well, it's funny. I just saw a tweet about this morning. um, I guess I decided like towards the end of high school, I was like, what do I want to do? And I was like, hey, I want to go to art school because I don't want to go to college and I just want to go to art school. And I wanted to go to film school. And because I love like watching films and telling stories. And I thought, how am I gonna pay for it? Like my mom's not gonna pay for it. And then yeah, the Navy called me and they're like, hey, so how are you gonna pay for college? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, well, we'll pay for your college if you join Navy. And I was like, oh, okay. And I guess I wasn't really that informed of a decision at the time, but it was a good decision to make to enlist after high school. And yeah, and then the army called me after I enlisted, and I was just like, sorry, too late.
And you went to so many different places with the army, right? You listed
Oh, with the
them.
Navy.
Yeah, yeah. Can you share
Yeah.
some of the experiences, like going to all these places?
Yeah, one time we went to Morocco in North Africa, and we took there's this thing called a community relations trip where we would the command our ship would set something up with an organization and to help out maybe some local people. So we went to an orphanage and we split up into groups. So some people painted a wall, some people helped clean stuff up, and while the whole time they were cooking lunch for us, so it was like, it was a Mediterranean food, so it was couscous, pieces of beef, and a bunch of vegetables, and they served it in a giant plate in the middle of our table. And then they gave us our plates, and they didn't give us any like forks or knives. And then so we were like, what? We started looking at each other like, are we gonna eat with our hands? And then the local girl, who's our guide, and she was wearing her sharab and stuff, and she's like, okay guys, dig in. And then so she grabs it, and you grab the food with the couscous and you roll it into a ball in your hand like this, and then she goes this, and she eats it like that. And yeah, so like we were just all like, okay, guys. So we all started eating our. I think there were spoons, but then like it was just a spoon to put it in your plate, and then you eat it off your hand from your plate. Yeah, so that was a pretty interesting memory.
And what kind of cultural heritage was that of eating habit from, if you remember?
I believe. I mean, it was Morocco, but I believe I heard the Egyptians ate with their hands back in the day. So I think that's yeah, probably something from like Africa when eating your hands and stuff. I'm sure they do it in other countries too. Yeah, actually, my family ate with their hands in the Philippines. Um, yeah, they would their hands would always be like this, picking stuff up, and then they would insert the food like this, like your hands a spoon. Yeah, but my grandma, I believe my grandma still eats with her hands, but my mom stopped for a bit, and now she just eats with a fork and a spoon.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear about different culture heritage. And I'm also wondering, with all these different places you went, Guam, Florida, Washington, East Africa, Gulf of Oman, Philippines, and Malaysia, what are some of the experiences of building relationship with people and the locals?
Um, like I said, like we did those com rails, so we did them all over. I can't remember where else we did a com rail at. I believe we went to this island called Seychelles off the east coast of Africa, and a bunch of guys from our ship. They played soccer with their national football team of Seychelles, and I remember my boss was like, "All right, guys, so yeah, sign up if you want to play soccer. We're just letting you know these guys play all the time, so expect to lose." That was one of them. Oh man, I can't remember much. Yeah, I believe that's one thing I remember.
Sure, thank you. And I'm wondering, especially one of the deployed location is Philippines. It's where your hometown. Like going back to like where your parents are from and originally, like what are some of the I guess cultural conflicts or from your own heritage in a way that you realize that wasn't originally found, and then you return your homeland and you found out about it.
could you the question's a bit too long. Do you think you can?
Sorry, yeah, I know. So yeah, I was just curious, like, kind of being brought up as a second generation, and then going back to Philippines where your originally, your homeland is. Is there any kind of cultural, I guess, shock as well in a way because
Oh,
you are kind of going back to as a foreigner.
oh yeah. So when people, this is at one point I flew back to Philippines to spend Christmas with with my family over there because I just wanted to experience something different for Christmas and New Year's. And like when people are like when they know you're coming, it's like they make arrangements for you, but not like it's like they know you have money, so they would try to extort some money out of me throughout the whole trip. And there's only like one ATM in like the town, so it just felt a bit uncomfortable because you know all of a sudden like everyone starts visiting me, and then they ask me for money. And yeah, that is definitely a culture shock because they just I don't know, it's just a thing. It's like natural, everyone goes through it when they go to the Philippines and visit them, and their family members ask them for money.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. Um,
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, since you left the army in 2018, what are some of the decisions that leading up to that?
Oh well, oh yeah, it's the Navy. And I just let's see, I was 2 years from leaving in the military, and I thought, what do I want to get into after? And so first I started doing photography, and but I didn't like to do portraits or like, get booked to do photography. I just wanted to create photographs. And that's yeah, it's kind of tough business to get into. And I want to be into travel photography where I'll travel around and photograph stuff for magazines. So that's one thing. I thought maybe I could get into trading stocks for a living, and good thing I didn't like fully invest in that. So then, yeah, it all started when I started playing music, and I thought, okay, maybe I can go to school for music, and then at the same time, I can write songs, and then hopefully by the time I'm done with school, I can, you know, launch a career in music. And I decided, yeah, that's a good plan to do because it takes time to write songs. And um, yeah, so towards about a month, a year before I left the military, I started saving money and writing songs, and I decided I wanted to move to Texas because it's warmer. And I was stationed in Washington at the time because it was cold. But yeah, it was the main thing was just leaving Washington because I couldn't take it. It's just it was a time and place where if you weren't born there, you couldn't make friends with people if you're a transplant. So it was kind of hard living there.
Wow, it's interesting you moved from the very north to the very south, and I guess that prepared you for last week.
Yeah, it kind of did.
um, yeah, what was some of the I guess favorite places that you've been after going from all the continents and all the places?
Well, man, this is like right after I left the Navy, I went to Japan, and Japan was not like any other country I've ever been to. Um, it was just their way of living. Like, so their mini marts had food, like healthy food, fresh food, and they had like sushi and ramen all ready to go. And it was just their way of food is like the quality of their food was just so much better in than the US. And I felt like everybody either walks and takes this train, so everybody was healthy and everybody ate healthy food. And I'm not sure about like the work life balance because yeah, but I mean definitely people just seemed happier there.
Are you still in touch with some of the people that you've met during your career as a in the military?
Ah, probably, yeah, probably like one or two people, but it's just, yeah, it's pretty hard to, keep in contact with everybody. I know some people are, I believe they're paid, their rank right now. Some people I work with, like this year, they got promoted to E7. So that's like, it's a big, they're called chief. So that's like a big accomplishment. And it's kind of interesting because when I met them, they were E4 and I was an E5. And then I left as an E5 and now they're an E7. So it's kind of interesting how see how they're progressing.
Yeah, thank you. And there's also one thing that I'm super fascinated with your life stories is that you mentioned you were homeless in 2019 for a couple of months. Can you share some stories around that?
Yeah, well, so I wasn't typically like living on the streets. I was just living in Airbnbs. Like I didn't have a permanent mailing address. So basically, I knew I wanted to move to Texas, and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll get a job first and pay off my car. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's a good way to do. And then when you go to school, you can focus on school and not worry about paying off your car. So first, I tried to use my military experience to get a job because I had a lot of mechanical skills. And when I tried applying for these jobs, they found out that I needed electrical skills too, which in the Navy, when something broke and it's electrical, I have to call the electrician. And it didn't work out so well in the civilian world. So I applied for like a bunch of jobs. And let's see, I drove to Houston in November of 2019. And then let's see, no way. Okay, it was definitely November, December, January, February. And then I ended up getting the job. No, actually it was September, October, November. Yeah. In September I arrived in Houston and I lived in a hostel and then I had like four job interviews lined up. And then it took me about maybe 2 months to finally get a job. Only I didn't have my social security number, my card. And so I had to wait a month for that to come in. So I didn't start my job till November, actually. So from September to November, and then I needed the job to get the apartment. So basically from September, October, November, I was, and then before that I moved out of my apartment. So in Washington, I was living in my friend's house, and all my furniture was in storage. So I guess you could say from July of 2019 all the way to November, I was without a permanent home. Yeah. And then I've lived in a bunch of Airbnbs. At one point I lived with this lady who was like really crazy. And she says like she would hear things that's going on in my room, like a hammering noise. And she's like, "What are you doing up there?" I'm like, "Nothing. I'm just reading a book." And then she just got more and more and crazier. And then I left and oh, I was just so relieved to leave. But she was really nice, even though she was really crazy. And yeah.
What was some of the kind of the feeling that you had when you were like living this kind of more like nomad lifestyle?
Um, well, it's for the most part, like the nomad lifestyle is pretty cool because it's like to not have a mailing address and not have a permanent home is interesting because you're always moving. Uh, I drove probably across the strait, across the states 3 times from from Florida to California, uh, California to Washington, and then now Washington to Texas. And I did that with a car full of things, and I'll have my guitar with me too. So I'll just, I don't know, I'll see like just the heartland is what they call it of the U.S. Go to places where people are kind of staring at me funny, but it's nice to see that part of the U.S. because people just they just fly to city to city. They don't really like to see the small towns.
What are some of the places that stood out in your memory?
Let's see. It probably have to be in the South because growing up in Hawaii, here in the South, like you learn about the civil rights movement and Southern food. Um, Nashville was an interesting city. Um, yeah, they have the country music museum over there. Uh, Good soul food over there, and yeah, Nashville and Memphis. Memphis is where the blues was born, and it's a street where all the blues bars are at. And yeah, so that's really interesting just to go to cities where prominently music, but like bluegrass and all the music that I'm used to hearing reggae in Hawaii, and then all of a sudden, I'm hearing bluegrass and blues and country music.
Yeah, I guess that's a perfect segue to your musical career, as you're now also taking classes at the HCC, the Houston Community College, for your music degree. Can you share with some of the journey? Like you spoke about starting as a performer in high school or earlier, and how does that lead to your your journey with music?
Oh, yeah. Well, I started playing guitar in high school. I took a guitar class, and our assignments was okay, learn the frets, learn the chords, and learn a song. And then they made us sing for everybody. And that was, I guess, yeah, that was the essence of it. They made us like, okay, you have a week to perform, and you're going to perform on Friday. And that's how each class was, and you had to do it in groups. And I remember the first performance, I was so scared, and it was just like it was just so nerve-wracking. um Eventually during that class, I just started performing by myself while everybody else was in a group, because I don't know, it was just easier that way. And when during my time in the Navy, I had to buy another guitar because I couldn't bring it to Guam with me. But towards the end of my service, I stopped playing guitar for like a bit, and then I started playing again. And me and my friend, uh, Eduardo, that's his name, yeah, we were like, okay, let's do an open mic night. And then it's like you sign up and then you get to perform, and then that's it. And I'm like, okay, wow, let's do that. And we rehearsed for a month straight, and it was just so nervous to do that. And it was just, we performed in a bar, and there was like maybe 5 people there. But then I invited like 3 or 4 of my friends, so there was like maybe 10 people in there. And yeah, so my friend played the drums. We just brought one big drum, a floor tom it's called, and then I had my electric guitar. And it was just like the whole night, it was just people playing their acoustic guitars, and then we just had like a little White Stripes thing going on. And yeah, that was actually like one of my most fondest memories. And then I started performing on my own for a bit, and then now I just perform by myself.
What are the feelings you had when you're on stage and the spotlights are on you?
Oh, so it's super bright. Some this one Jay Bize, he hosts the open mics at the Advent Garden in Montrose, and he would set the lights down low so the lights go upwards. And you practice playing guitar, but then you don't practice with a flashlight going in your eye. So that was just, oh. And then I'm not afraid of like people staring at me, because on these open mics, it's like people are just at a bar and they're just in tables talking to each other, and they just want to listen to music. But most of the time, like some people are looking at you, and which is nice. But yeah, it's just sometimes you play at bars and people just don't, acknowledge you, which is, it's a good thing and it's also a bad thing. But I try to rehearse enough to, I just want people to stop what they're doing and hearing the music and watching me, because I just want to put a lot of effort into it.
That's interesting. And I'm also wondering, has your Navy experiences brought any kind of inspiration to your composition or performances?
Well, definitely composition. um I think a song I wrote, my first song that I wrote that was very popular, The Drifter. I wrote that. a year before I left the military because I was in a state where I was stressed out because I didn't have a plan of leaving the military. And the drifter, to me, it reminds me of that nomadic lifestyle that I had for a bit. And then a lot of my songs came because of what happened after I left, like being unemployed and homeless. I have a song about that. And then now I'm learning a lot about decolonization and civil rights again, and a lot of these issues that are in Houston. And a lot of that's affecting my songwriting too. But for much of this, like the Navy really gave me a work ethic that I was able to bring everywhere because I was like technically my first job. So there was that too. And yeah, work ethic as just doing like a little bit of something every day.
That's super interesting. And I guess your like kind of really amazing life stories will definitely bring a lot of inspirations as um, in your art, like of composition and performance. And next, I'm also wondering, since I saw you join the HEB in back in April 2020, although it looks like you've left the position, like was that part of the kind of COVID pandemic effort?
Yeah, they hired me. Well, I ended up getting the interview the day I got laid off on my last job, but they were pretty quick about it, which is really nice. Yeah, it was a temporary job for the COVID. They just did a mass hiring online, and I got laid off at the airport. And I just thought, like, I was actually since the coronavirus started happening, I was working at the airport, and I would see the crowds disappear, and it would just ended up being in a ghost town during the peak pandemic. And we were all the whole company was like, are we going to keep our jobs? And they started closing down the restaurants one by one, but we were maintenance, so we were like, okay, we still got to maintain the restaurants. Eventually, like me, there was three of us, and they laid off, me and another person, and kept one person on. So there was that, and then I got hired by HEB to be a personal shopper, and their work ethics over there were pretty interesting because they care about you working. Yeah, they're very like friendly companies. So yeah, I do recommend if anybody's looking for a job with them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And how has your kind of COVID pandemic experiences been since last year about the same time? How has your year been?
Well, um, I mean, so last March, yeah, it was definitely scary because I just lost my job, and then I started collecting unemployment, which is not bad, and then I got a job at HEB, and then the best decision to make to fix all that was to go to college and use my GI Bill. So GI Bill has been helping me with living costs, and then everything. So when I get to college, everything started getting better with the whole year going on. Things started to open up in Houston, but I mean, I just not gonna risk it because it used to be like we couldn't perform as a musician. Now the bars are starting to open back up, and now you can perform at bars. So people are getting gigs again, and that's a pretty good thing to do. But I decided because people were a bit sketchy about meeting each other online because there's a pandemic going around. I felt musically it was a good time to write stuff, and it was a good stuff to release music. And well, right now I just got a music video release, but we're working on more music videos. So what I'm focusing on is more content beside the music.
Have you been creating music or performing on online, like on Zoom, like over here?
Uh, well, yeah. So what we did a live stream in December, and this was a benefit concert for the Philippines. I asked my friend Jenna Marvella, you know her, yeah. So she performed during the concert. But yeah, we raised $220, and we gave it to NAFCON Texas, and NAFCON took the money and gave it to an organization in the Philippines. The They had two typhoons that affected them recently.
That's great. Thank you so much for doing that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm wondering how has moving to Houston, like you've been with the Filipinx artists group of Houston, and how can Houston's community of Filipinos connect with your heritage?
Well, they it helped a lot. Because I moved here, I didn't know anybody, and where I met Rachel first, and she told me to join them, and I ended up knowing all of them. So yeah, Rachel was the first person who put me on and helped me introduce me to all these people. But yeah, like since I have been talking to Matt Manalo and Stan and Vinny, and I learned about decolonization and about your heritage. There's a lot I didn't know about my culture that I learned from them. And yeah, I realized like in school they teach us U.S. history, but they don't teach us our history. So I wanted to get to know our history, and I learned so much things about Filipinos during colonization years and discrimination and sort of fighting for farmers' rights. So it's all new to me, and it was nice to know all of it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I'm also wondering how has you felt during your kind of research and studies of decolonization?
It felt so. It felt well. So when I first joined the Navy, I got made fun of a lot because there was definitely a Filipino community in the military. It's just they all spoke Tagalog, and my mom did not want me to learn Tagalog because growing up in America, we need to learn English, and you speak perfect English, which is a good skill to have. And I got made fun of my first year in the Navy because I didn't speak Tagalog, and the Filipinos said that I'm not Filipino because I can't speak Tagalog, and I carried that throughout my whole life, thinking, okay, I'm not Filipino enough. And then I worked in a very prominently Caucasian workspace, and they would crack jokes about Asians sometimes, and I'll just ignore it. And yeah, since leaving the Navy, I've been learning about my culture, and I still don't know how to speak Tagalog, but that doesn't make me not Filipino. And yeah, as because the more I learn about my culture, it's like I don't have to know the language. I mean, I'm not good at learning languages. I tried learning Spanish, and I wasn't good at it either. So yeah, like not speaking your language does it not make you Filipino?
Yeah, that's amazing to hear that you're embracing that part of your identity through this journey. And I'm also wondering, have you discussed or spoken with your earlier generation, like your parents, your grandparents, about the Filipino heritage?
I did talk to my mom recently because I told her about this interview, and yeah, we were proud of we had Filipino heritage. We were proud of it. It's just that we're living in America, so my mom wanted me to learn, English, and you're not always working with Filipinos, so you got to work with other cultures too, even with the Caucasian cultures. So you got to learn to work with them too. So for us generation that was born in the U.S., we're Filipino at home, but we're American outside our house. But at home, we always ate Filipino food, and uh, I believe me and my mom were members of a folk dance team. In We would perform cultural dances all over Hawaii.
I guess this could be a little bit of a challenging question. So, have you had any conflicts with your parents or your grandparents regarding the generational differences about certain topics or opinions?
Hmm. Let me think. I do know, like me and my mom had a big argument about me moving to Texas after the military. every big decision like I made on my own, she always had something to say about it. So even joining the Navy, she was just all like, ah, no, thanks. And yeah, or wanting to live in the mainland, and she wanted me to move back to Hawaii, but it's like the job opportunities there aren't that great. But yeah, it was always my mom's just traumatized from her death in our family. So, but then it's like me, I experienced certain things due to the Navy and being in living in the mainland for a bit. So I kind of knew where I was going. I just had to show her that I was able to do it. Um, and then my grandma, she's still alive. There are certain times she would see something on TV, and I think my grandma would say something sexist like, "Oh yeah, a woman can't do this and that." So yeah, definitely my grandma. My grandma actually survived the imperialism when the Japanese invaded the Philippines. She survived that, her and her family.
Has she told some of the stories about that
Yeah,
memories?
yeah, she did. I did a school project, and I asked her about it, and then I think at one point she didn't want to keep talking about it. But I mean, because I was young at the time, I didn't want to keep talking about it. But then I wish I knew it was traumatizing for her before I asked her about it. But she did tell me that the Japanese, they said they saw planes flying over the sky and everyone started running. They said that they the town had to live in the mountains and dig a hole, and they said that they made people, the Japanese made the locals dig their own graves. uh yeah, and she said, oh yeah, the Japanese players says, they would say that if you see Japanese guards, they'll look at you and they'll say, hey, let me kiss you. And yeah, that's just, yeah, so that is kind of horrifying that my grandma went through that.
Well, that's definitely heartbreaking to hear. But I'm happy we're able to document this as history, as part of the Oral History Archive. Um, is there anything else you would like to add for your grandparents' part of the memories?
Let's see, man.
Besides the war, did I tell you about how they met each other?
My grandparents. Well, right now my grandma is still kicking. My auntie takes care of her, and she has to take her to the hospital probably 4 times a year. And my auntie even told me like, you should see grandma because that she might not make it this next year. You don't know what's gonna happen. And yeah, so I visit my family sometimes. Sometimes I fly back there in Hawaii, and my grandma, like, she used to talk a lot. Now she rarely talks. And I don't know, but my grandma, she the last thing she gave me was $200 for Christmas. And I used that to buy a guitar. I Not the whole guitar, just I used it with my paycheck to buy a guitar. So I guess the guitar I bought was just like a little bit of my grandma in there. So I always have that guitar with me, and that's how I remember.
That's wonderful. I see that the generational hope and that musical dream of yours is carrying on. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's sweet. I'm wondering, you probably don't have any children now, but in case, like in the future, what kind of family values will you be instilling in the next generation?
Let's see. I've been through moments in my life where I just didn't know how to stand up for myself because I was afraid of people not liking me. So what I would tell the future generations is to like fight, like not physical fight for what you believe in, but mentally and verbally, call people out and, say something about what's going wrong. Because I used to, I feel like the culture me and my mom would go around because we had a traumatic experience with my father was to just like, if you see trouble, just run away. And So now I would rather teach the future generations to yeah, be vocal or verbal about what's going wrong. I see that going on now with the new friends that I've made here. A lot of people are like sharing resources with one another about how to help out our community, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's really empowering to learn that we're trying to instill those values and the kind of passing on the torch to the next generation to stand up for themselves. Um, and I'm also wondering if you would be interested to do a time capsule with us, like to tell like the people who are watching this, um, like maybe 50 or 100 years later.
No, I'm good. I mean, this whole thing's being recorded, so this whole interview is a pretty good time capsule.
Great. Is there anything else you would like to add before we conclude?
Oh, no, not at all.